last snapshot of the U.S. employment market before Election Day, the U.S. added just 12,000 jobs in October, far below market expectations. Will this report be the Achilles heel for the Democrats as they face voters next week? Good morning. It's another power-packed episode of Business Week. This week, Google invests in AI skills development in Africa. Nigeria signs a Naira funding deal with the IMF to cut currency risks, while global financial markets brace up for next week's hotly anticipated U.S. elections. And speaking of which, the Democrats get an October unemployment report that would make a grown man cry. And Kenya gets the thumbs up from the IMF to access $600 million in funding. These stories and much more here on Arise. I'm Rolake Akinkwefilani, helping you catch up as always. If you couldn't keep up during the week, stay tuned. So we'll start as always with a look at global energy commodities, and Brent finished quite a rally on Friday at the close of trading, 1.35%. Of course, there are lingering risks that Iran could launch an attack on Israel from Iraq. Now, this would be a major geopolitical event if that did happen. Time will tell. We'll be watching events closely during the week, but Brent finished up at $73, but still quite low. Not a good thing for the major oil producers, including the oil majors. WTI crude was also up by 1.52%. Natural gas was down by 2.11%, and RBOB gasoline was up as well by 1%. Let's take a look at equities markets around the world. Of course, starting with Nigeria here, the market's not such a great trading week, ending the week down. That's the all-share index in Nigeria at 97,432.02 points, down by 0.22%. And of course, 8,000 deals just above that. Volume 888 actually million shares traded, value of 15.84 billion, and market cap down from last week, down to 59 trillion naira. Let's take a look at equities in Africa. Joburg, Accra were both up, as was Casablanca and Morocco, but Kenya was down by 0.94%. Now, Wall Street. This is a very interesting one. Despite the not-so-great October jobs report, all the major indices, some of the major indices actually on Wall Street, were up at the end of the week of trading. Counterintuitive, what are the markets reading? Interesting times here. It's interesting, despite the poor jobs report for October, unemployment is still flat. So I guess markets still very positive about the American economy. The Dow Industrial Index was up by 1.14%. S&P 500 was up by 93 basis points, and NASDAQ was up by 1.27%. Tech, they're still a trailblazer. Now, my favorite part, my top picks for the week. Well, the U.S. market is in the spotlight now. The jobs report came in at 12,000 jobs added in October compared to the previous month where we had, I think, about 200,000 jobs September. Now, markets had predicted around 100,000 plus additional jobs to be added. Now, the main issue here was the Boeing strikes going on in the U.S. market. Of course, we saw about 33,000 workers in manufacturing in Boeing out of work due to those strikes. And of course, hurricanes, the hurricanes you've had in Florida and elsewhere in the Southeast have really been a drag on the U.S. economy in recent times. But it must be said that the unemployment rate is still flat at about 4.1%. And let's not forget that the Fed recently cut rates with the idea that inflation is under control. So despite this October report, of course, which is not great for the Biden administration and, of course, Kamala Harris, the U.S. economy is still in a relatively safe space, so to speak. But, of course, politics and jobs are a political, there's a lot of politicking around the elections. When it comes to the U.S. economy, it's a major talking point. So we'll see how that influences voter sentiment. Nigeria has signed a deal with the International Finance Corporation on local currency funding that will be channeled to Nigerian SMEs to cut currency risk. Now, this is a major one, given the fact that you've seen Naira depreciation by about 71%, actually, when we looked at the numbers since last year. So this is good news for SMEs. The assumption is that that money will be channeled through commercial banks or development finance institutions. And the IFC actually has, is looking to invest around $1 billion in the coming months in Nigeria, particularly local currency funding. It already has funding, about $2 billion worth of funding already in the Nigerian ecosystem. So this is good news. This was done on the sidelines of the World Bank meetings between the governor of Nigeria's central bank, Adoso, and of course, Makta Diop of IFC. Ghana is now considering importing petroleum products from Nigeria. This was on the sidelines, said by the head of the National Petroleum Authority of Ghana, on the sidelines of the OTL Downstream Conference on Africa, which held in Lagos recently. And his view is that, look, Ghana spends $400 million monthly importing petrol from Europe. If its neighbor is a producer, why not show some brotherly love and import from Nigeria? Now, it must be said that Ghana has two refineries already, the Tema Oil Refinery, Takoradi, and I believe the Central Refinery. And in April, the Ghanaian government announced a $12 billion refinery construction launch. Now, it hopes that that refinery will produce around 300,000 barrels. But I guess pending that, the government is mooting the possibility of importing from its neighbor, 2 countries removed, Nigeria. Good news there for Nigeria, of course. That should strengthen economic relations between both countries. The IMF board has approved a disbursement of around $600 million to Kenya. Now, if you've been following Kenya since the start of the year, the country has been facing some fiscal challenges, liquidity issues, despite a relatively stable currency and inflation under control. William Ruto has been trying to meet IMF conditions. Now, I consider this a major breakthrough because, of course, if you go back to the fiscal and tax bill that Kenya was going to pass, which sparked a lot of protests, raising taxes would have been one of the things to put on the table for Kenya to access IMF funding. So the fact that Kenya was still able to get this disbursement, despite that bill being thrown out, says a lot about the government's ability to negotiate and get this deal done. So kudos, great news for Nairobi, the government in Nairobi and the Kenyan economy. There's still a lot more money that could be drawn down under that arrangement. And finally, gold. It is still the safe haven for investors around the world. The value of gold went up to, global gold demand was about $100 billion in the third quarter of this year as demand rose by about 5%. Now, that's the highest level since before COVID. And the main driver of that, I mean, there's several drivers. First of all, central banks around the world are buying up gold, right? And then we're seeing a real take-up of the asset from high net worth individuals, especially offsetting a recent slump in demand for Asia. So we're seeing central banks as well in emerging markets around the world buying up gold. And of course, if you recall, we talked about Zimbabwe and pegging its new ZiG currency against gold reserves. So clearly, demand for gold around the world is on the up, seen as a safe haven asset. And that flight to gold has also been helped by the cut in rates by the Fed. Of course, there's a bit of an inverse correlation there between rate cuts and flight to safety for assets such as gold. Well, that's it for my top picks from around the world.